Hello, fictional. Welcome to the fiction series X. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei is son of Sirzechs and Grayfia? Part 3. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Hyoudou woke up to quite the shock. She was lying in a strange bed wearing only her underwear, while her best friend's crush, Issei Hyoudou, slept beside her, naked as the day he was born. She was just about to scream and throw him out of the bed when she noticed Kaori was sitting in a chair next to where the pair lay, a slight grin on her face at the reaction she just witnessed. What happened? Yui asked, clutching the sheet to her chest protectively. Well, even with that reaction you're taking this better than I expected. Kaori said, flashing her friend a grin. Don't worry, he already got an earful for even saying that he should do this, but it worked. Well, I'm still kind of dressed, and if you're here then I doubt he could have done anything too bad. Yui explained as her heart rate slowed. Apparently healing magic works best with as much skin contact as possible. Issei didn't tell me how you died, but welcome to the club. Kaori said, offering her friend a pair of jeans and a top. Yui got out of the bed and put on the clothes. So I'm a devil now too? Yui asked, releasing her wings. She flapped them appreciatively for a moment before putting them away. Yep. Finally, I'll get a hand taking care of this lazy ass master of mine. Kaori said. Speaking of, mind giving me a hand with breakfast? Let's go. Yui said, following Kaori to the kitchen. Issei walked into the kitchen 20 minutes later, now dressed, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and sat down at the table as the two girls cooked away with a passion. Morning, girls. Issei said. Morning, Issei. The two replied at the same time. Eggs and bacon? Kaori asked. Works for me. Issei replied, making a quick text. The plate was placed down in front of him, and he took a bite before a reply came back. And we now have the rest of the week off school. He declared. How? Yui asked, surprised. Sona most likely. Kaori guessed. Our idiot of a master agreed to a raiding game 5 days from now, and we need all the time we've got to train. It's not likely to make a huge difference though, unless we've got some kind of secret weapon. Otherwise we're pretty much screwed. Kaori explained, catching the new knight up on the situation. Well, yes, we are kind of screwed. Speaking of a secret weapon, Ravel mentioned something interesting in her text. Apparently you were able to cut off Riser's hand and then do it again without doing anything. Issei asked, curious about his new knight's abilities. Well, I cut it off with that sword. Then when he regenerated it I got mad that the cut hadn't worked. Next thing I knew his hand was on the ground again and he was sending me flying, Yui said, looking at her forearms, remembering the bandages that had appeared in response to her overwhelming anger that someone had hurt her friend. Think that was her sacred gear? Kaori asked her king. Probably. If only there was some expert we could ask about it. Issei wondered aloud. Suddenly the front door was thrown open and an angry silver-haired maid came crashing through. Issei Grimory, what the hell did you do? Grayfia's voice reverberated around the house, causing all of its inhabitants to shake in fear. She entered the kitchen, her usual stern but calm look gone. She was not happy right now. Mom, how did you find out about that? Issei asked, trembling in the face of a mother's wrath. Ravel told me. Her brother got her to organize the raiding game. Grayfia said in the calm voice of a predator about to strike. Now you will tell me exactly what you did over the last 2 days. Okay. Issei explained the situation to Grayfia and found that she was far more understanding than Issei had initially expected. Apparently you needed a certain level of training and discipline to be able to stand in the same room as Riser Phoenix without wanting to tear his head off. Even then the prospect was still greatly tempting, although only one devil had acted on it. Sadly Headless Riser hadn't lasted long, to the disappointment of quite a few, though the show had been very entertaining. Fortunately between Ravel and I, we were able to negotiate an extra week of training time for you. Grayfia said, now understanding the situation. You now have 12 days, and your father has said that I am free to handle your training as I see fit. He also gave me full access to his peerage. Miss Murayama can train with your father's knight, Saoji. He was the one who taught Kiba. Actually I have my second knight now. Yui Caddis, Issei gestured to the new girl who waved meekly at the maid. Kaori's friend got caught up when Riser tried to attack her, and I reincarnated her. Issei said. She can join the training as well then, Issei's mother said, nodding to the girl. Also I suspect her sacred gear apparently is quite effective against Phoenix regeneration. When she chopped his hand off, he regenerated it, but she was able to cut it off again without doing anything. I believe it's an effect of her sacred gear, although I can't say for certain until we can identify it. Interesting. I'll have someone check the archives for any sacred gears like that. Grayfia said, making a mental note. The girls looked at the mother and son for a moment as Grayfia finished calming down. Now then, I will need time to prepare the training ground. Since Ona gave you the rest of the week off, use the time to prepare and do any devil work you need to do. Get your new knight started on the basics as well. Your training will be in the underworld, so make sure you tell your parents you'll be away starting Saturday. I'll tell Sona to give you next week off of school too so I can train you then as well. Since you'll be using Ria's pieces they'll be coming along for the training as well. My parents won't be an issue, so I'm gonna do a little cleaning up in the bedrooms, Kaori said. Issei looked at her curiously. Issei, I know you don't think about it, but we need to at least get them usable. Your entire peerage will move into this house at one point or another, we need the space. Yui blushed at the statement although only Grayfia saw. The silver-haired maid hid a small smile at the sight, it seemed her son was building a harem after all, even if he was doing it unknowingly. Issei nodded in understanding. Just don't throw anything out. I'll look through it when I get a chance. He took a deep breath and looked to his newest knight. I'm gonna go talk to my parents about this training camp. Yui said. They should be cool about it though if I tell them it's for kendo. Alright then, meet back up here at 2 or so. We can get you started on contracts. I've got 3 appointments today, Kaori you're needed by one of your regulars, and I'll take Yui to one of mine, so she can see what they're all about. Issei took Yui to his first contract of the day. It was a new one and the guy needed relationship advice, he had a crush on a girl, and wanted to know how to get her to notice him. Immediately Issei was stumped due to his own lack of success, in his opinion, with the fairer sex. Well I don't know how much help I can be, I've never even kissed a girl. Issei admitted. Instead it was Yui who stepped forward. Alright, let's see what I'm working with here. She walked around the boy poking and prodding. About 14. The boy nodded. Decently tall, hunched back though, that'll need some work, hairs all over the place. She lifted his bangs and looked at his face. Workable. She declared with the authority of a judge at a sentencing. The shy boy looked worried at the sudden interest he was getting from this strange woman. Yui grabbed a paper and pen from nearby and began writing. What are you doing, miss? The boy asked. First we're going to need to deal with your posture. I'm guessing you spend a lot of time on the computer. The boy nodded. Try and make sure you sit up properly. Now then, let's go shopping. Shopping? The boy asked. Stumped he looked to the only other male in the room for help. Yep. Yui said, Issei just shrugged in the background. Just go with it. If anyone can help you it's probably her. Issei said to the confused kid. He smiled his devilish grin, so tell me about this girl. The 3 made their way to a convenience store and the boys followed Yui as she grabbed items off her list. Shampoo, hair gel, a skin cream. Afterwards they went to a hairdresser and the boy was whisked away by Yui and the staff. After 2 hours of a whirlwind makeover the boy was worthy of being cursed by Issei and his old friends as a damn pretty boy. Job's done. Yui said nodding confidently. I've gotta say I'm impressed. Let's see what this will cost you. Issei looked at his phone app. Oh, right, we needed to get payment first. Yui looked ashamed that she'd just taken control of the situation. It's fine. Issei said. You nailed it. The boy was happy with the result and Issei let Yui keep the 4,500 yen payment, although he told her about the commission he'd be receiving in the future as her king. Contracts are a way for devils to increase their power. Every time you complete a request you get a little bit of demonic power from the person who requested it. It's not much, but it all adds up over time. Issei explained as Yui and him returned to his house. Especially since we can live for centuries. Alright then. So I'll need to hand out those flyers after we get back from training? Yui asked. Until we get familiars, yes. Issei said vaguely. You've got the rest of the day off, I need to get to my next contract. Issei's last contract of the day was an impromptu one that came in late in the evening as he was getting ready for bed. Sighing he summoned a magic circle to answer the call, glad he was still wearing his casual wear from earlier in the day instead of pajamas. It was a new contractor after all so with some luck he may get a regular customer. When he stepped out of the magic circle he took in his surroundings, it was always surprising what you could learn from a person based on where they summoned you. He was in a bedroom, a female one based on the stuffed animals on the bed. At this age males tended to avoid the things although girls kept them around, they seemed to think it made them cute. On the wall hung several posters of famous female Japanese tennis players from Naomi Osaka to Ai Sugiyama. A few of the posters were even signed. Leaning against the wall where the posters hung was a tennis racket and several tennis balls that lay strewn across the floor. On another wall was a bookshelf, and thanks to his devil sight Issei could make out a few of the titles. Some were related to school subjects, some related to pet training, a few related to tennis, but what caught his eye were the books related to mythological monsters and contracts. Excuse me, a timid voice spoke up interrupting Issei's thoughts. Turning he took notice of his summoner. It was a young, busty girl lying on the floor where she'd fallen back in surprise at his sudden appearance. She was dressed in the Kuo Academy uniform, with long brown hair that seemed to be naturally twisted into drells like ravels. He didn't recognize the girl so she wasn't in his grade, maybe she was in an older class. He considered the idea for a moment before accepting it as the most likely explanation. She certainly looked like she was his senior in terms of body development. "You called, ma'am. I am Issei Grayfia, how may I be of service to you this evening?" He said, bowing respectfully at the waist. The sudden action caused the young girl to leap in fear. I want you to help me end my engagement," the woman said, putting on a brave face as she stood up, although Issei noticed her legs were trembling. "You want me to help end your engagement?" Issei asked for clarification. The girl rapidly bobbed her head in agreement. "Well, let's sit down," Issei said, following his own advice. The girl hesitantly followed his example. "Now perhaps you could give me some more details," he requested, and the girl began to explain her tale. Her name was Hyoudou, a second year at Kuo Academy, a year above him, which was why he hadn't recognized her. She had recognized him though, as he was one of the few boys in the school which still possessed a massive female student body. She was a member of the tennis club and was set to become the president next year if everything went well. However, her family life was much more interesting. Apparently Hyoudou came from a long line of beast tamers, humans that made contracts with monsters and yokai for their service in exchange for something. However, over the years the family's ability for contracting and summoning had worsened as the blood had dispersed, thinning as new blood married in, diluting it. That was what led to Hyoudu's predicament. She was a powerful tamer, more successful in getting contracts from monsters and yokai than any of her other relatives. It was all due to the fact that her father had married a foreign beast tamer, boosting her ability as she was the offspring of two powerful clans. Seeing his own success and a chance to restore the family's power, her father had arranged a marriage between her and a distant tamer family from northern Japan. In an attempt to undermine him and win back her freedom, Hyoudou had asked her father for a way to get the engagement cancelled, however he was unrelenting. Her mother was of no hope as she had died in childbirth and had been the last of her clan. "He's a man that never backs down and always follows through on his decisions, but I thought that he might cancel it if I said I had a boyfriend," Hyoudou explained, her head down. "It seems stupid now, and I know it sounds cliché, but I want to marry for love, not for my family and their interests. I know that feeling," Issei said, sympathizing with the poor girl. "My aunt is actually in an engagement too, and her fiancé is a jerk. Is she going to have to marry him?" Hyoudou asked, wondering where Issei's story was going. "No idea, although I'm going to fight the bastard in just under 2 weeks," Issei said, revealing an expression of determination on his face. "Well, I wish you the best of luck, Grayfia-san," Hyoudou said, flashing a smile. She'd initially been scared of the devil, but he was so genuine that she just found herself enjoying their talk. "Thanks. Now as for your engagement, I don't know whether your plan will work or not, but let's go with it," Issei said, running his hand through his hair. Truthfully, this kind of a request was a first for him, and while he was trying his best, he was a little unsure of what to do. "I'll talk to some other devils tonight, see what they can tell me. If anything happens, you know how to reach me," Issei said, pointing at the flyer she had used. "I will, and thanks for the help, Grayfia-san," Hyoudou called, waving goodbye as Issei summoned a magic circle to head home. "See you later, and don't worry about the payment. We charge on completion, not on how long it takes to complete the task. Also call me Issei. If we're going to be seeing each other often, wouldn't it be better to just call me by my name?" he said, waving goodbye. "I will," Hyoudou said as Issei stepped into the circle and was gone. "Issei." Hyoudou tested it out, a small smile on her face. She liked the sound of it. Shaking her head, she ran off to meet with her father. The next time Issei got summoned by Hyoudou was the following afternoon. He was in the middle of eating a late lunch while Yui and Kaori had gone to the orc to get swords from Kiba. The swords were the short-term solution, he knew, but he didn't have the time to get custom swords made for them before the raiding game. As he put the last piece of rice in his mouth, Issei felt his stomach jerk, the indication that someone had summoned him. He knew it was Hyoudou since all summoners had a unique feel in their magic, but what interested him was that he was being summoned to a local park during school hours, compared to her house like last time. Putting his bowl in the sink, Issei jotted down a quick note for his knights before summoning a magic circle. He came out in the park next to Hyoudou, who was holding the flyer she'd used yesterday. They were standing in a clearing off of the normal path, so people walking wouldn't see them. She was dressed casually today in a top and skirt, although her hair was still in its drill shape, confirming his suspicions. "So what's going on?" he asked. He'd expected her to summon him again, but during school hours was a surprise. "I'll tell you in a minute, but for now just follow my lead," she quickly whispered as a new voice rang through the clearing. "Is this him, your boyfriend?" a strong voice asked. Issei turned to find the speaker. It was a well-built man clad in a cape and a helm with 2 horns jutting out of it. He wore a sleeveless workout shirt, shorts, and combat boots that all seemed to be made out of animal hide, although Issei believed that it was more likely monster hide due to the man's job. That's his voice trailed off. What could he say in the face of an outfit like that? "My father," Hyoudou said quietly before yelling to the man across the clearing, "Yes. He doesn't look like much, the man commented, earning an eyebrow raise from Issei. So what am I doing here? He asked, turning back to Kiam, who was now looking off to the side, fiddling with one of her drills. I told him last night that I had a boyfriend so he would break off the marriage. But he said he'd only do it on one condition. He would only do it if you could beat him in a fight. Issei gave the man a quick once-over, seems easy enough. I can sense some magic from him, but not enough to beat me. So saying, he began cracking his knuckles and stretching. No, that's not what I mean. You need to beat him in a tamer battle. Kiam explained. It's going to be best 2 out of 3, and you need to use the beasts to fight. I told him you don't have any, so he'll let me lend you mine for the fights. The fight will take place using 3 different types of monsters: sea, land, and air. I know it's a bit strange, but please do this for me. She begged, bowing her head. Of course I'll do it, Issei said confidently. You choose the beast, I'll take care of the fighting. Seeing his grin, Kiam visibly relaxed. Okay, let's do this. You two done yet? Kiam's father called out, hands crossed over his chest impatiently. You can always just surrender if you want to. We're ready, Kiam yelled confidently. Issei won't lose to you, he's the man I trust with my future. Then let's see how much of that trust is warranted. With that statement, the 2 beast tamers put their hands on the ground. I'll let you know right now, I'm summoning my merman Jirs. He'll show you what it means to be in a fight. Fine, then let's have a fish fight. I'll go with my mermaid, Islina. Kiam voiced her champion. Issei was getting excited, imagining the half-woman fish girl Kiam was going to summon. However, the monster that appeared was nothing like what he'd expected. Instead of a fish tail, the lower body of the creature had muscular legs that looked like they belonged on a male bodybuilder. As for the top, there was no busty beauty there, instead the top of the mermaid was a fish, a tuna fish. As for Kiam's father's champion, it too had muscular legs, but the top of his monster was a shark. Okay, then I'll leave it to you now, Issei. Kiam said, looking at him with admiration. Yeah, I've got this, Issei said with a confidence he didn't possess. His confidence in victory had gone out the window the second he saw that he had a tuna against a shark. Boy, are you going to come at me or will I need to come to you? Kiam's father yelled at him. I'm coming. Issei called, but when he turned to the mermaid, he saw that she was flopping about on the ground next to the shark fishman. As they watched as the shark stopped moving and lay still, soon followed by the tuna mermaid. All 3 just stared at the 2 monsters. Issei turned to Kiam and saw that she was looking away from him and attempting to whistle. Feeling his accusing eyes on her, she began to sweat. I got caught up in the moment and may have forgotten that mermaids can only breathe in water, she admitted sheepishly. Issei looked at her father and saw that he had the same expression on his face. He sweat dropped. Jirs died first, so I'll give you round 1, Kiam's father said, compassing his face in an attempt to play it off. As for round 2, don't expect victory to come as easily. The 2 once again placed their hands on the ground to summon their respective monsters. I'll summon my Yukiana Christie, Kiam declared. Once again, the name of the monster being summoned registered with Issei. When you say Yukiana, you mean a snow woman, right? He asked, wanting to confirm his expectations of the yokai. Yeah, me and my dad both have one, so you'll see 2 of them. Just like the legends say, they're beautiful women. Issei pictured a pale snow-haired woman fighting on his behalf and grinned, but once again his expectations were destined to fall short. The yokai that appeared this time bore more resemblance to a bipedal gorilla than a woman. Christie stood just above 5.5 feet and was covered in white fur, with a face almost identical to a gorilla. However, horrifyingly, she had 2 blonde drills for hair coming over her shoulders just like her master, although thankfully it was only 2 compared to the several brown ones that hung from Kiam's head. They're also known as Yetis, Kiam commented helpfully to Issei, who'd begun to sob internally. For all his improvements and maturity, having 2 beautiful monster girls revealed to be, well, monsters was too much of a shock for his system. Even more horrifying was the fact that the yokai was winking and blowing kisses at him, causing Issei to shiver. At least the tales of Yukiana having ice powers didn't seem to be a complete lie. Across from Issei, Kiam and Christie, Kiam's father had just finished summoning his Yukiana. It stood slightly taller than Christie and had straight hair instead of drills. I'll start us off this time, he declared. Stephanie, drum. At his command, the now-named Stephanie began to pound her chest. Issei turned toward Kiam for an explanation. Yukiana can increase their physical abilities by pounding their chests, she explained quickly. Then we'll do the same thing, Issei declared, ordering Christie to drum her chest as well. However, Christie ignored him and began to run across the clearing toward Stephanie. As she ran, the ground began to freeze and mirror images of Christie began to rise from the ground until several copies were charging toward Stephanie, indistinguishable from the real one. She's using Snow Clone, a technique unique to yokai that live in cold, snowy territory. It allows them to make replicas of themselves out of snow and ice, helping them when they go hunting. Thanks, Kiam, Issei said. However, something was off. Stephanie had stopped pounding her chest and stood there as Kiam's father took something out of his pants pocket. Issei frowned in confusion. It was a banana. As he watched Kiam's father tossed it into the air, and to his astonishment, Christy leapt after it with a single-minded focus, causing all of her clones to collapse. In the air and defenseless, Christy was unable to react to Stephanie tackling her out of the air, her increased strength making it impossible for Christy to escape. Victory was easy to determine, making the score 1-1. Bananas are Yuki-ana's favorite food. Kiam explained after dispelling Christy. Normally, seeing a banana would cause a Yuki-ana to pursue it with a single-minded intensity. The fact that Stephanie was able to ignore it shows how well my father has trained her. Barely are gorillas, Issei sobbed in his head. But then an idea popped into his head. Is it cheating since he used a banana? Issei asked. No, there was never any rules against outside interference, so it's perfectly legal. She said. Turning, she saw a demonic grin make its way across Issei's features as his plan took shape. Then we're gonna win, he declared confidently. The deciding round was a sky battle, but for this battle the champions had to ride on the monsters. Kiam's monster this time was a birdman named Sky that had a human body with wings for arms, and normal face, except for a beak where a nose and a mouth would be, and feathers for hair. He stood 6 feet tall, but his species couldn't fly due to the size of their wings in relation to their body. However, to make up for this less than desirable trait, his species could run at speeds only just slower than an average devil knight. That'll do, Issei said after Kiam explained Sky's abilities to him. I'll just ride him piggyback style. His calm demeanor fooled Kiam, but when she saw her dad's third and final monster, she resigned herself to her upcoming marriage. Maybe he's not a bad guy, she thought dumbly. He has monsters, maybe he'll let me teach them tennis. That cheered her up a little. She was a massive tennis fan, and it was one of the first things she taught her monsters after she made a contract with them. Earth, to Kiam. Is anyone home? Issei snapped her out of her trance by snapping his fingers in front of her nose. What kind of monster is that? He asked, nodding his head towards the massive bird Kiam's father was mounted upon. The monster had a brown plumage with a wide underbelly and was 30 feet long from beak to tail feather by his estimate. As for its wingspan, Issei watched as they unfurled and the monster propelled itself into the air with massive flaps that almost blew all three on the ground into the air. The wingspan was at least 80 feet. That is a rock. Kiam said, defeated. And an adult one at that. They regularly feed on elephants, and the flapping of their wings back in ancient times was said to be able to destroy a village from the wind it generated. They've died out over the years, and few tamers even get a chance to see one. Due from a contract is almost unheard of. I'll resign, Issei. There's no way you and Sky can beat my father. Don't be so sure, Issei said, flashing her the grin she'd seen on him earlier. Just sit back and enjoy the show. Within 5 minutes, you'll be free to marry whoever you want. Issei's prediction was slightly off though. It took him 8 minutes to best the flying creature. I got the idea from your dad, Issei said, putting a jacket he'd been wearing around Kiam as he explained what happened. He used outside items to defeat Christy, so I did the same things. Using magic I summoned a raging blizzard. I didn't directly attack with magic, that was done by the snow and sleet. Me and Sky were fine since we were on the ground and underneath a rock shadow most of the times, so it took the worst of it. I'm surprised it took your father this long to submit. He wasn't exactly dressed for cold weather, and flying in the air could have only made it worse. I get what you mean when you said he was pig-headed. He didn't even end the match, the rock did, landing once he passed out. The snow in the air was thinning out as Issei dispelled the magic, although a few flakes still fluttered here and there. However, he admitted defeat and agreed to call off your engagement, so for now at least you're safe. Thank you, Issei, for everything once again. Kiam said. The two were sitting in her room drinking tea the day after the tamer battle. Kiam had summoned Issei to give him his payment for completing her request. However, for now the two friends were just enjoying each other's company. On Issei's back was a signed racket used by Naomi Osaka in one of her tournaments and won. When Kiam had given it to him, he declared that the payment was too much, but she'd insisted, saying that he could take it as a deposit for any future request from her. So how's your dad taking it? Issei asked, curious about her dad's reaction to the upset in the third round. Kiam laughed. He officially hates your guts. He caught the flu from your little blizzard yesterday and can't get out of bed. Worse is the fact that none of his monsters or yokai can come near out of fear they'll catch it. The only one who can get near him is Stephanie, so she's been put in charge of nursing him back to health. She then gave Issei an inquisitive look. Why weren't you at school today? Issei choked on his tea, nearly spitting it out. Cough. Why do cough, you ask? Cough. His counter question earned him a blush from his companion. I thought that maybe we could eat lunch together, she said quietly, spinning her finger around one of her drills. A sudden memory made her stop and her expression darkened. Also, who's Kaori Murayama and Yui Kadis? She asked sweetly. Issei looked at Kiam, sensing the question was some sort of trap. They're my knight, he said, taking another sip of his tea. They're knights. My servants. Have you ever played chess? Kiam nodded. Devils work in similar ways. High-class devils are given evil pieces which they can use to create servants. Each piece relates to a piece in chess and grants aspects of that piece. A bishop gets a magic boost, a rook gets increased physical abilities, the knight gets a speed boost, and the queen gets the qualities of all of the pieces. So how many servants do you have? Kiam asked, taking in the sudden rush of information. Only 2 at the moment, Kaori and Yui. They serve as my knights. Although there is a third person I'm trying to get into my peerage. You remember how I told you I'm going to be fighting my aunt's fiancé? Kiam nodded. That's what we're fighting over. She wants to join my peerage, but she's in his at the moment. He won't let her leave, so we're fighting in order to decide who gets her. That's horrible. It is what it is, the problem is I'm outnumbered. I only have 2 servants, and one only became a devil within the last 3 days. The other one has been one for less than a month. Riser's peerage on the other hand have had years to practice and build up skill. I can borrow members of my aunt's peerage, but even then I'll still come up short. He's so confident he's going to win he promised to trade me an additional piece if I won. How did you make Murayama and Caddis devils? Kiam asked quietly, looking down at her cup. Issei took another sip of tea, looking at her over its brim. A moment of silence passed between them. It was clear Kiam wasn't going to give up until she got a response. Issei was the first to give in. I won't tell you the details, you'll have to ask them yourself. It's their story to tell, not mine, but they were both dead. The evil pieces have the ability to bring someone back from death if they've been dead less than 10 minutes, although being dead isn't a requirement. Before they died I had at some point asked them if they wanted to be a devil. Each of them agreed, so I felt comfortable doing it even if they had no say in the matter. Would you reincarnate anyone? Kiam asked, genuinely curious, but Issei was already shaking his head no. Devils can live for centuries, sometimes millenniums. During that time most people you know will grow old and die. Being a devil means accepting that fact. A peerage is like a second family, a second chance for those who are reincarnated to have a place to belong. I'd never force anyone to join my peerage if they didn't want to, and those that do will need to be able to get along with the others. If I died, would you reincarnate me? Kiam asked, putting her cup down to look Issei in his eyes. Issei found himself unable to look away. Only if you wanted me to. Otherwise I'd mourn you as your friend and lay you to rest. I'd be sad and I maybe would even regret not doing it, but it would be your decision to make, not mine. Kiam nodded, satisfied with that answer. Okay then, if you did reincarnate me. What piece would I be? Issei thought for a moment, summoning his evil pieces he arranged them like a chessboard. The only pieces absent at the moment were the knights and the king, which didn't even exist. Issei looked over the pieces for a moment, raising first the queen, then a bishop, before finally settling on a pawn which he held up to Kiam. I'd be a pawn. She deadpanned. Issei nodded seriously. Aren't they the weakest pieces in the game? Why a pawn? She was getting mad, but she wasn't sure why, which made her all the angrier. Because it's the piece that best suits you. Issei said quietly but confidently. A pawn may seem like the weakest piece, but it actually is one of the strongest. Pawns have a unique ability, promotion. In enemy territory or with their king's permission, a pawn is able to change its ability into any of the other pieces. Whereas a knight or a rook would be constrained to their one ability, the pawn could change depending on the situation. They could be support, tank, spy, anything. Yui and Kaori are both members of the Kendo team, and each of them possesses a sacred gear that complements their sword skills. That's why I reincarnated them as my knights. You have no set role, you don't rely on one monster you change as shown with Sky and Christie. You would be best suited to be a pawn, able to adapt to the changes around you and then deal with it using your abilities and monsters. That's why you'd be a pawn if I reincarnated you. He looked at Kiam, who was leaning back, a look of surprise on her face. You put a lot of thought into that. She noted absently. Issei nodded. I have to, you're only given 15 pieces and I've already used 2, so I'm down to 13. With only that small a number I need to carefully consider who I want in my peerage and what role would best suit them. After all, it sometimes takes multiple pieces to reincarnate someone. My dad's knight, bishop, and pawns each took several pieces to reincarnate. That's why he's only got 7 people in his peerage compared to the 15 devils normally get. My dad also told me that one of the young devils, a member of my generation, has a pawn that's worth several pieces, although I don't know the exact number. Since you Murayama and Caddis are both your knights, then you didn't need to use multiple pieces on them, did you? Kiam asked to confirm what he'd said. Issei answered with a quick nod. Kiam nodded thoughtfully as she thought up another question. Okay, you already told me that you'd only reincarnate someone if they wanted it, but what about what you wanted? Issei turned to look at her. Do you know how many people die in a day? Hundreds of thousands, probably millions. I'm pretty sure that among that number I could easily find someone I'd be glad to let into my peerage. Probably several. But I'm not all-knowing or all-powerful. It might sound ironic since I'm a devil, but I'm only human. I'm not God with a capital G. I make do with what's in front of me and so far I feel like I've done pretty well. I know the same thing goes for Riaz and Sona. They look for people who not only want to join but would benefit from it. All of us make do with what we can and like all people try to make the best out of it. Guillaume looked at Issei and could feel his honesty. He truly did put the opinions of others first. He wasn't going around making servants willy-nilly. He thought it through, weighed both sides, and then decided what to do. In the spur of the moment she leaned in towards him until her mouth was right next to his ear. I give you permission. She whispered in what she considered to be a sultry voice, low and inviting. What? Issei exclaimed leaning back. Guillaume rolled her eyes. She pointed at herself. Give you, she pointed at Issei. Permission. She showed the word as interlocked hands going up and down. To shown as 2 fingers. Reincarnate me, she ended pointing back at herself. She was shocked to see Issei lean in until she was pinned against her bed by her arms. Leaning in close he whispered in her ear with a voice that could melt chocolate, get Kaori and Yui's permission first. Then we'll see. Looking up she watched as he stepped back flashing her a grin while he did so. Then summoning a magic circle he was gone. Well, that went well, she thought with crimson cheeks, ignoring her rapidly beating heart brought on by Issei's voice. Yui and Kaori were testing out their new weapons by trying to kill each other. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best way to get Yui adjusted to her new knight speed. Since Kaori had been a knight long enough to understand and control her piece's speed boost, Issei had left her in charge of Yui's training until they left Maou with Grayfia. Yui and Kaori had forgotten the shinai they used in kendo in exchange for the swords they'd picked up from Kiba 2 days earlier at Issei's command. Kaori was wielding a new Shitatsu Koda which she'd flatly named Shitatsu Koda 2. However, Yui's sword was quite different from a shinai. When testing out swords she'd felt drawn again and again to the old-fashioned long-bladed katanas used by samurai of the past. After testing out quite a few and some minor tweaks from Kiba, she'd settled on one which she'd lovingly named Usui Sarasa, or Thin Slicer. Usui Sarasa had a 40-inch blade and a black handle wrapped in pink silk to match her hair. Kiba had adjusted the blade so that while thin it was deadly sharp with a weighted tip for thrusting, despite the fact that katanas were primarily used for slashing. Yui ducked low to avoid a swing from Kaori and countered with a lightning quick thrust from her katana. However, the swing had been a feint meant to force Yui low, and with a spin the blade slid past Kaori, causing Yui to overreach. It was a simple move for Kaori to swing her sword around and whack Yui in the side. The 2 white wing stubs on her back activated and Yui had half the speed she'd previously possessed. Kaori allowed Yui to step back and recover her stance, a grin on her face. You always try to thrust through your opponent, she called out to her friend. Try to just get your blade in them, it doesn't need to go through. A few inches of point are just as deadly as a few feet of edge. The advice, while well meant, was taken the wrong way by Yui. She was fed up. She'd expected being a devil would be easy, she hadn't realized that it meant constant training and fighting. However, she knew from kendo tournaments that rage would only cloud her judgment, so she forced herself to take deep breaths to calm herself. In. Out. In. Out. Once she had control she turned to her friend and analyzed her situation. Unlike Kaori, who was naturally gifted when it came to wielding a blade, Yui had always found it difficult. She wasn't as fast or strong as her friend, and in their first few months of kendo together back as children she had watched as her best friend grew in leaps and bounds. It had felt as if a cavern had separated the 2 girls, and whenever Yui tried to bridge the gap with late training or weekend practices, Kaori would just develop a new skill and grow further out of her reach. To keep up with her friend, Yui had needed another way to stay in the game, and after days of thought she'd found it. The answer was her mind. She'd spent months watching tournaments and fights, read books on body language, magic tricks and deception. All until she'd gained the ability to analyze her opponents, break down the techniques they used, and counter them. It was her specialty. She'd learned to read those she fought, find the subtle clues in the way they held their body, and shifted their weight as they prepared to strike. If Kaori was the member of the kendo club who stood on top through sheer talent and skill, then Yui would stand in second place as the perfect counter, built by hard work and effort. With her new skills, Yui was finally able to once again stand beside her friend, however she knew that Kaori was better. Being able to read her opponent's next move was meaningless if her body was unable to react fast enough, unable to prepare a counter in time, and if Yui let her mind be clouded with emotions, her ability to analyze went out the window. She had to stay calm and open her mind, as cheesy as it may have sounded, to let herself take in all the small details that the brain normally ignored. Yui lowered her guard, allowing her sword to fall by her side, baiting her opponent to strike. Kaori knew it was a trap, but with Yui at half her original speed and Kaori boosted by the other half, she let herself be overconfident. She was faster than her friend, been a devil longer, allowing her to have more control over her knightly speed, which Yui still struggled to control. With a rush, Kaori charged forward swinging her blade down in an overhead strike. However, the second she was committed to it she knew that she'd lost, she'd fallen right into Yui's trap. With perfect control Yui stepped to the right as Kaori's sword began its downward descent and then gripping the katana with both hands, she swung the blade into Kaori's exposed stomach. Kaori fell onto her hands and knees, the sword clattering to the ground as she struggled to catch her breath. "Damn, that hurt," she complained as she rolled over so she was sitting on her butt, legs outstretched, hands keeping her propped up. Yui grinned down at her friend. "You always get overconfident at the end when you taste victory. It leads to mistakes and openings. Which you take advantage of," Kaori muttered, rolling her eyes, widening her friend's grin. The sound of clapping reached their ears, and the two turned to see Issei leaning against the open doorway applauding their performance. "Well done you two. Kaori, nice job reading your opponent, and Yui, good job capitalizing on her openings. However Kaori, you're too aggressive, you rush into any opening you see, and you rely too much on your sacred gear. As for you Yui, you knew that Kaori outmatched you. When you fight someone stronger than you don't rely on the thing they're better than you at, you use your head. You only stepped back and used that brain of yours at the end, until then Kaori had you dead to rights." The two nodded seeing the truth in his words. Issei stepped into the kendo club room and looked around. The last time he'd been here Yui was dead, Kaori was unconscious, and he'd felt powerless in the face of how this had been done under his watch. It made him mad and he clenched his hands into fists subconsciously. Seeing this the two knights shared a look before storing their swords and then running up they pressed themselves into their king's arms, each taking one possessively. "It's alright," Kaori reassured him, guessing where his thoughts were. "He won't be able to do it to us again. We're training, growing stronger so that when we face him, he can't do a thing." Issei turned to Yui who was nodding in agreement and sighed. "It's just, I swore that I'd be stronger. That me and my peerage would be strong enough to prevent something like that from happening again. Kaori died and I revived her. Then Yui died because I couldn't stand to see Riser hitting on what's mine." Issei didn't notice the blush that spread on Kaori's face when he said that she was his. "I feel like I cheated you out of a chance to be human," he said, his eyes still on Yui who was pressing her body into his left arm. "If it wasn't for me you'd still be alive. You'd have a chance to grow up, find somebody you loved and marry them, maybe have a kid or two. Now you're a devil, everyone around you will grow old while you stay the same. Your parents, siblings, all of it will go on, and eventually you won't be able to see them without a spell to make you look your actual age. It's..." His voice was cut off as a finger was pressed into his lips. He looked into Yui's eyes and saw that she was mad. He lowered his eyes. She had every right to be, he'd listened to her abuse, her anger, it was the least he could do after what he'd done. "Are you an idiot?" He looked up, surprised at how mad she was. "How the hell is this your fault? In case you forgot I was already asking you to turn me into a devil before I died. If anything I'm thankful to that Riser, bastard because it finally got you to use an evil piece on me. I wanted this. So don't go doing your little, I wouldn't have done this if there was any other way parade, because I'm not buying it. The way you're acting right now is an insult to both me and Kaori." Issei turned honestly dumbfounded to find Kaori nodding her head in solemn agreement. "You saved us. It wasn't an angel or a god that brought us back and gave us a second chance, it was you," Yui said as she poked Issei in the chest, hard. "So you'd better take responsibility for us and be a damn good king because we're willing to do anything for you. You're our king so shut the fuck up and lead us, damn it. We're your knights, you tell us to fight, we fight. You tell us to kill, we kill. You tell us to die, we're gonna go and do that too because we trusted you have a reason for it. Now quit this pity party and tell us what you want." The knights watched as the sadness in Issei's eyes turned into determination. He took a breath to collect himself and then looked at each of them. "You're right, what's done is done. We can't change it so I'm not going to bother to try. Right now we need to focus on Riser and the raiding game, which is actually why I'm here." He took a deep breath. "The last few days I've been working on a contract for a person at our school. That person possesses certain skills that I find desirable. They know I'm a devil and they've expressed an interest in joining my peerage. I was going to accept, but I wanted you two to have a chance to meet that person before I take them up on the offer. I told them that they'd likely find you in here during lunch, training, even though you didn't need to be at school this week." Issei shut up at the looks Kaori and Yui were giving him. "What? You're just going to say yes? I was begging you to revive me as a devil for days, and you're just going to do it to them after they ask once? How is that fair?" Yui complained annoyed, while Kaori rubbed her temple in silent agreement. Issei backed up suddenly on the defensive. "Well, first off, you had a sacred gear. We didn't know what so I wanted to wait to see it before I revived you. She doesn't have one. Also with you I had time to waste, as there was nothing serious in the immediate future I needed to concern myself with. However, now I'm under the pressure of an upcoming raiding game against someone with a full peerage, and I'll still have an incomplete one, even when I combine both mine and Ria's. Third, we're leaving for training tomorrow, so this is my last chance to get another piece on the table before we head out. The girls couldn't argue with the logic as all the points he'd raised were valid ones. Fine, one last question. What piece would he be? Kaori asked. The pawn, but I'm not a he, I'm a she. The three devils turned to look at the door where Kiyomabe had just entered. Yui and Kaori recognized the girl from seeing her around the school, although they didn't know her name. This is Kiyomabe, Issei said, walking over to stand beside her. She's a second-year student here at Kuo and a member of the tennis club. She's also descended from a family of beast tamers and is the person who I've been helping with a contract over the last few days. What was the contract for? Yui asked without turning away from the girl. Issei-san helped end my engagement. My father organized it, but Issei beat him in a fight and now I'm free to pursue whoever I'm interested in. She blushed at that, although the two girls noticed a slight tremble in her hands and legs. Issei said you were a beast tamer, what does that mean? Kaori asked next. Like Yui, her eyes were locked onto the new girl. It's just like the name implies. I'm a beast tamer. I form contracts with monsters and yokai that allow me to summon them to help me in exchange for something at the time of the contract. I'm the best my family's seen in a long time, which is why they arranged a marriage for me. But Issei broke. Kaori finished. Kiyom nodded her head yes, a faint blush on her cheek visible only to the two girls who were looking at her. The two devils exchanged a glance before they turned to their king. Leave us, they commanded as one. Issei tried to voice an objection, but the look they sent him had him scurry away with his metaphorical tail between his legs. I'll call Sona and tell her to give you the afternoon off. Issei told Kiyom as he left, closing the door behind him. He sighed, he was certain he'd only ever know two things about girls. First was the fact that he'd never understand them, and second was that women were the scariest thing in the universe. Hell, his mom scared the king of the devils to death. Once he was outside the building, he pulled out his phone and called Sona, who picked up after the second ring. Yes. Hey, I need you to do me a favor. Issei, you're running out of favors to give me, Sona stated matter-of-factly. I gave you and your peerage both this week and next week off for training. I'm excusing Ria's peerage from school next week, which is especially difficult because Kaneko doesn't go to this school yet. I'm not really sure what else I can do for you. It's not for me, it's for a student by the name of Kiyomabe. A second-year member of the tennis club. Ah, the beast tamer. Yes, I know her. She missed school earlier this week. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? I know, but I can't tell you. Contract privacy and all that, Issei explained, receiving another from Sona. According to devil law, the details of a contract could only be known by those involved, and sharing the details without the permission of the contractor would cost the devil all the power he had earned from the contract, in addition to a small percentage of their own power based on the size of the contract. Due to this, large contracts were rarely revealed, although some devils competed over who had the more petty contracts. The only devils who had a right to know another devil's contract without causing them to lose power were the Satans, who had a right to know the details of any contract they wished toward the kings of a peerage, although this only extended to the members of their own peerage. Revealing the details to them didn't cause a fallout and allowed devils to reveal the details of contracts that could endanger themselves or others. Very well, but why does she need this afternoon off? Sona asked. For Issei to call her and ask for a non-member of his peerage to be excused from classes meant that he had some reason to be with her. I'm considering inviting her to join my peerage, Issei said after a moment. He didn't know if Sona or Riaz had an eye on her, but this way he could basically call dibs. Unbeknownst to him, that caused Sona to raise her eyebrows in surprise, something that her queen, Tsubaki Shinra, took notice of due to how early it happened. Fine, I'll grant your request. But next time just use a magic circle to call me for devil business. If it's for human matters, use the phone. That's what Riaz and I have always done. Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks again, Issei said as he hung up. Walking over to a nearby tree, he sat down to wait for the girls to finish whatever it was they were doing in the club. After a few minutes, the warm afternoon reached him and he felt his eyes close. Sensing no immediate danger, he allowed himself to slip into dreamland. That was Issei, I presume? Tsubaki asked Sona as she hung up her phone. Yes, it seems he's found a potential peerage member. That caused Tsubaki to react. At the moment, there were no more sacred gear users in the school after Sona had revived Saji and Issei had revived Kaori and Yui. The three high-class devils had claimed all those that she knew of that had potential. Who? She asked, genuinely curious. Was it possible Issei had noticed someone Sona and Riaz had skipped over? Kiyomabe, Sona said, her hands interlocked as she rested her head on them deep in thought. The beast tamer? I thought she had a fear of devils. We approached her to see if she was interested, but she was too afraid to even talk to us. Tsubaki remembered. The poor girl had been trembling so hard she'd barely been able to ask the pair to leave her alone. When Riaz had tried it hadn't gone much better, even though she tried to use Kiba as bait to attract her. As a result, the two kings had written her off as unusable due to her fear of devils and decided to look for peerage members elsewhere. It seems that Issei may have succeeded where we failed. I wish I knew how he did it. She shook her head in wonder before turning to her queen. Anyway, he requested that I have her excused from her afternoon classes, say she went home due to a cold or something, and throw in her club activities too. If he reincarnates her, she won't be going to them. If we see her this afternoon at the meeting, have her excused for the rest of next week as well. She'll likely have taken his offer and be training for their raiding game. As Tsubaki ran off to carry out her king's orders, Sona once again shook her head at how Issei had been able to accomplish what she had. I wish I knew. Issei was awoken by a soft pressure on his forehead. Opening his eyes, he found himself looking into the face of Kiyum, a sweet smile on her face. I'm sorry, did I wake you up? She asked. Instead of answering, Issei just closed his eyes again. Don't stop, he said softly, it feels nice. He didn't need to open his eyes to know that she'd be giving him her sweet smile. A contented sigh escaped his lips as he felt her finger begin to stroke his messy hair. As you wish, my king. She said softly. Hearing her response, Issei cracked open an eye although he kept the other closed. King? So you… Yes, I have their permission. Kiyum said, nodding her head towards Issei's feet. Propping himself up, Issei looked down the length of his body, only to see his two knights standing there angrily. Now girls. Kiyum reprimanded them, a note of pride in her voice that was inaudible to Issei. We had a deal. Winner got to give a lap pillow. At that, Issei turned back to see that he had indeed been lying on her lap while he slept. Ahem, Issei, if you don't mind, we need to hurry it up. Kaori said, getting his attention. School just let out for the day and we're supposed to go and meet up with Riaz and Sona in 15 minutes at the Orc. Issei nodded his acknowledgement. The three kings had decided to have the peerages meet one another before Issei left with his and Riaz for training. It was more of a formality than anything else, so that everyone knew which devils belonged to which king at the school. Speaking of peerages, Issei turned to his knights. So you two are okay with Kiyum joining? He asked just to be safe. The two girls nodded, although Yui looked a little exasperated. Though he hadn't known her long, Issei could tell what she was thinking. I just told you earlier to do what you want. You're a devil and our master, so make a decision and stick with it. We'll follow whatever path you take. While Issei did intend to be more confident in future recruiting, he still desired his peerage's input. Great, it's a Friday so Kendo isn't meeting today, let's do it in there, he said, leading his way back into the building, leaving the girls to follow along behind him. Once they were inside, Issei closed the door and set a barrier on it so that if any humans tried to enter, they would forget what they were doing and remember something they had to do elsewhere. As for other devils, they would see the Gremory clan sigil and know to stay away. Turning, Issei saw that Kiyum had taken off her top, leaving her in her bra and skirt. Issei turned his head sharply to the side, although he noticed that her breasts were bigger than both Kaori's and Yui's. What are you doing? He asked, head to the side. Kaori and Yui told me that it would be easier if I was in my underwear. Kiyum explained, and you can look, Issei. You're going to be my master, so it's only right that you know everything about me. Hearing that, Issei turned so he was looking at her, although he kept his eyes firmly away from the murderous aura where he assumed Kaori and Yui were standing. White, he thought absent-mindedly. That suited her innocent personality, although there were moments like just now where he thought that black or purple lingerie would be more suitable for her. It doesn't really matter, he said. It'll only make it easier by a few seconds. Great, so what do I need to do? Kaori asked. Just lie down on the floor, hands by your side. I'll take care of everything else. But before I start, are you sure? Once I'm done, there's no going back. You'll be mine forever, just like Yui and Kaori. Just do it. Kiyum said, her cheeks having turned red at his comment. Unbeknownst to Issei, the same had happened to Kaori and Yui. Okay, then close your eyes. Summoning his evil pieces to him, Issei looked them over before taking out a pawn which he set on Kiyum's collarbone. As he set it down, Kiyum shivered, the piece felt ice cold on her bare skin. Then Issei began to chant, I, Issei Gremory, claim Kiyum as my own. She shall be my pawn, the one who leads my forces from the front at my command. None shall have her except for me, so let her be made into my servant. As he chanted, the red pawn slowly sank into Kiyum's chest, who shivered at the foreign feeling. However, as it entered, she felt it warm up until it was as if she was standing next to a peaceful hearth or napping in the afternoon sun. The comforting warmth spread throughout her body until she could feel it in every fiber of her being, within her very soul. So I order, let it be done. At the last word, the warmth in Kiyum disappeared, though she could feel a new strength inside her. You can sit up, Issei said. She followed his advice and accidentally unsheathed her new devil wings, giving her a scare. Sensing her fear, Issei let out his own, followed shortly by Kaori and Yui. The four devils stood for a second, taking in the others around them. "So how do you feel?" Issei asked after a moment, sheathing his wings followed by his peerage. Guillaume considered his question. "I feel the same, but also different. It's like there's something inside of me that wasn't there before." Issei flashed her a grin. "That would be the pawn inside of you. I already told you what it can do, but I'll give you a short recap later. Anything else?" Guillaume shook her head no, but Issei got a question from Kaori. "Why didn't she pass out like me or Yui?" she asked curiously. Issei's expression turned downward. "Because she's alive and healthy. I reincarnated her with her knowledge and permission. In cases like those the reincarnation is short and sweet. But when it comes to reviving the dead, well, let's just say that once the soul leaves your body, it's not that willing to come back and it takes time to settle back in. That's why I took you two to my bedroom when I reincarnated you guys. It let me keep an eye on you and use healing magic to make sure nothing went wrong." "You took them to your bedroom?" Guillaume asked, jaw agape. Issei turned to respond, but Kaori answered for him, a twinkle in her eye. "We'll explain later, but now's not the time, we need to go." "The orc, right. What's that?" Guillaume asked. She'd heard the name before, but she couldn't place her finger on what it stood for. Issei flashed her a Cheshire grin. "It's the club run by my aunt. Now that you're a part of my peerage, don't you think it's about time you met my family? I've already met yours after all." Guillaume shook her head, blushing, but followed along with the knights behind Issei, her new king. The peerages were on edge. Before them were the three most powerful devils in the area, likely in all of southern Japan. The child or siblings of the Satans, their masters, sat before them. Ria's Gremory sat at her desk, resting her head on her interwoven hands. On one couch to the left of Ria's, from Ria's perspective, Sona Citri sat, hands on her lap. On her right sat a girl with glasses and dark hair that fell down to her knees. Across from Sona, Issei lay lazily on a second couch, taking up the entire sofa, his head propped up with a pillow, so he could look comfortably at Ria's and turn his head to look at Sona. Behind each king stood their respective peerages. After a moment Sona sighed, "Fine, I'll go first, otherwise none of us are leaving here anytime soon. I'm Sona Citri, a second year. I'm the younger sister of the Satan Seraphol Leviathan, an heir to the Citri clan." She gestured to the girl by her side, who bowed to the kings. "My name is Tsubaki Shinra, a second-year student, and I'm Sona's queen." After that the rest of Sona's peerage introduced themselves. "I'm a first-year student, Momo Hanakai, Sona's bishop." A white-haired girl introduced herself. "I'm Ryakusaka, a first-year student, and like Momo I'm Sona's bishop." This from a brown-haired girl. "I'm Omaguri, a first year, and I'm Sona's knight." This came from a girl with a mix of red and brown hair. Issei felt Yui and Kaori take special notice of the girl with new interest, although they kept it hidden. "And I'm Tsubasa Yura, Sona's rook, and like the majority of the others I'm a first year," a blue-haired girl said. The last member of Sona's peerage stepped forward, an arrogant smile on his face, although Issei didn't miss the look the white-haired girl Momo Hanakai was giving him. "Looks like Kaichu saved the best for last. I'm Genshiro Saji, her pawn, and I'm worth 4 evil pieces, so any pawns in your peerages better watch out." Yui and Kaori felt Guillaume, who was standing between them, start to tremble from the threat put out in the open. Kaori opened her mouth to say something, but before she could she felt a sudden burst of murderous intent from the couch in front of her. As she watched Issei turn until his feet were on the floor and pushed himself up, she could almost see a red mist of rage emitting from her king as he strode forward, stopping in front of the pawn. The other two kings seemed like they wanted to say something, but they decided to just watch the show in silence, for now. "Sorry, I guess I didn't hear that last bit you said. Could you repeat it for me please?" Issei said, flashing a disarming smile at the pawn as he lay a friendly hand on his shoulder. Saji was unsure of himself. He had said what he did in an effort to make his king look strong, but the boy in front of him was acting differently from what he'd expected. However, even if he was a high-class devil, he only had 3 servants, whereas Sona had almost her entire peerage completed, give or take a few pieces. Smiling confidently he repeated himself, "Yeah, I was saying that I'm the strongest pawn here, so any pawns in your peerage better watch themselves," or that was as far as he got before he felt bone-crushing pressure on his shoulder, where the king was gripping him. "Ah," he cried as he felt the bone in his shoulder crack. "Sorry Sona," Issei said, offering Sona an apologetic grin, "but it seems that your pawn dislikes one of my servants," before he could even meet her. "He isn't exactly giving her the best outlook when it comes to devils, is he?" Issei tutted, his eyes deadly serious. He tightened his grip, causing Saji to whimper. Sona sighed, angry at her pawn, though she managed to hide her emotions from the others. "I agree that my pawn has insulted you and your servants." She flashed Saji a look of frosty disappointment before turning back to Issei. "You can do what you want, just know that I'll make certain this is the last time he makes such a statement." Issei nodded in understanding before releasing Saji, who collapsed to his knees, his working arm coming to his injured shoulder as he whimpered in pain. I feel like this makes us even, don't you Sona? Issei said as he returned to the sofa where he lay back down as if nothing had happened. Sona sighed again. Issei had played his cards well. In one swoop he'd manipulated the situation so that all the favors he owed Sona were paid back. She had already planned on how she'd call in a few of them, but now if she did that she would owe him one. The thing about devils was that when it came to favors owed, they always had to pay them back no matter what the favor had been originally. Very well, Yura takes Saji to the club room. I'll deal with him when I get back. The last part of the message sounded like a dark promise, but the rook nodded before picking up the injured boy and carrying him out of the room. When the door closed, Riaz turned to her nephew. Very well, considering you caused a fuss, Issei, I think it's only fair that you go next. Sure, sounds good to me. Issei said, rolling his neck. I'm Issei Gremory, first-year student, Ria's nephew, and I'm the firstborn long-lost son of the Satan Sirzechs Lucifer and Grayfia Lucifuge. These girls are my peerage. So saying, he gestured to the three girls who'd been standing behind him. On the way over he told them the order to go in and what to say, so they'd know what to do. Kaori stepped forward first. I'm Kaori Murayama, Issei's knight and a first year. She bowed respectively before stepping back so Yui could step up. My name's Yui Kadis, and I'm Issei's second knight. She stepped back before she cried out, oh yeah, and I'm a first year. Last but not least was Kiyum, who stepped forward, a slight tremble in her voice from the way Saji had talked. I am Kiyum Abe, I'm Issei's pawn and I'm a second-year student. Do I need to tell them how many pieces I'm worth? The question was directed at Issei, who shook his head no and gestured for her to step back, leaving only the three behind Riaz. First up was a black-haired girl with what was clearly the largest chest in the room. As she felt his gaze on her, the girl shivered in hidden pleasure. She'd seen him shatter Saji's shoulder with one hand, oh the things he could do to her. Smiling, she introduced herself, I'm Akeno Himejima, a second-year student and Ria's queen. She stepped back so that the person everybody knew could go next. I'm Hyoudou Kiba, a first-year student and Ria's knight. So saying, he flashed everybody in the room his Prince Charming grin, which invoked a few blushes from the Sona peerage, although there was a noticeable lack from Issei's. Their only reaction was for the two knights to size him up, realizing that he was their matchup in the event of a fight. Last but not least was a small, white-haired girl, almost doll-like in appearance, who was nibbling on a piece of chocolate. Kaneko. Rook. I'll be a first year next year. Then she stepped back to focus on her chocolate, allowing her king to stand up from her chair to introduce herself. And I'm their king, Riaz Gremory. Heir of the Gremory clan, little sister of the Satan Sirzechs and Issei's aunt. She turned to Issei and his peerage. You'll be seeing a lot of me and my peerage next week, since we'll be training with you for the raiding game. Nodding his acknowledgement, Issei stood up and excused himself, saying that he needed to explain a few things to Kiyum and his peerage about training, as well as what to tell their families. Once they'd left, Riaz and Sona turned to talk, while their peerages intermingled, although the queen stayed with their kings. So he managed to recruit the tamer. Riaz noted. Sona nodded, he called me during lunch and had me excuse her from her afternoon classes. Looks like she took him up on his offer. The two kings looked towards the door Issei and his peerage had left through. She had such a fear of the underworld and the devils. I'm surprised that he was able to do it. Riaz tried to think of how Issei could do it, but she kept drawing a blank. The only thing I can tell you is that she missed school earlier this week and Issei mentioned that he'd been completing a contract for her. Well, that doesn't narrow things down, Riaz complained. She sighed, it didn't matter how Issei had recruited her, all that mattered was that he was growing his peerage. If she needed to, she could just ask Issei or Grayfia for the information. Will you be going to training with them? Sona asked. Riaz wasn't able to participate in the raiding game, only her peerage, but knowing her friend she'd go along to supervise the training. Or treat it like a vacation, she could see her friend doing both. Riaz flashed her friend a grin. What do you think? Sona sighed, Gremory, she complained in her head. End of the part 3. So how was this story? I hope you like it. And if you like it, share this story with your friends and like the video too. And don't forget to subscribe our channel for daily awesome fanfiction. Okay, it's time for me to go. Bye bye.